p.m. Monday, March 27th, policy meeting. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. And if I have no objections, we're going to move ahead with the agenda that was sent out. All right. So going into our new business, and the first item is going to be public comment on agenda items, and we do have a few this morning. So we'll start with those. And the first name, I can't read your last name, I'm sorry. Amanda, can you tell me what your last name is? It's Sugarelli? Shicarelli. Gotcha. Okay. All right, perfect. Well, step on up.
Absolutely. Take some breaths. Okay. Deep breaths. Okay. Hi, my name is Amanda Ciccarelli. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work with children and adults. That includes sexual abuse trauma survivors. It includes people of color. I have a 20-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son. My son does not go to DD2 schools because I lost faith in the educational system. I lost trust in the educators. So I think it's very important that our library materials reflect the best of what we have to offer as a culture. We don't have to, have every single book that ever existed in our libraries, nor do we in any library. But our children deserve the best of our civilization, the best of our culture, a variety of books that interest different levels. But as a citizen of this community, I have an invested interest in what happens to our children. They are our future. And if we allow them access at our libraries to books that have graphic depictions of sexual behavior among children, what we're doing is promoting the idea that that's appropriate. And given the people that I work with, I know that it's not appropriate. I know that it's harmful for children to engage in sexual behavior. I know that there are risks of sexual disease, risks of pregnancy, risks of broken relationships. So as a citizen, I want to be able to file a complaint and have it taken seriously. I would like the schools to be a place where I could choose to send my son for high school, but as it stands right now, I can't. There's other issues involved there, but this idea that we're racist or bigoted because we don't want genderqueer or lawn boy, that's not true. I have homosexual clients. I support them. They're adults. Even my teens who are bisexual or homosexual, I support them. I accept them unconditionally. But I would teach them about the risks of certain behaviors. But that is not the role of the schools. Anytime we have adults, including myself, adults who are not the parent, talking about sexuality with children, we are opening them up to the idea that that is okay, and it makes it easier for that malintentioned person to come in and have more inappropriate kind of discussions and behaviors with those child. We need to have clear boundaries, right? Sexuality is something, refer back to the parent. In my work, I support the parent's role. I say, hey, I can't tell your parents about these discussions, that's confidential, but I encourage you to talk with your parents about what are their values, right? Do they want you to wait until marriage? Do they think sex is fine? Talk to them, right? I'm not imposing my values, but we have now as a school system where some progressive so-called people have come in, and under the cover of social emotional learning, under the cover of inclusivity, they are pushing ideas that harm children, right? So we need to all have a voice in that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ciccarelli. Okay, next I have Ms. Jennifer Bendetti.
Hi there, I'm Jennifer Bendetti, and I want to talk today about the IJL policy regarding library materials and their selection and adoption. The first thing I want to mention is that I think that any proposed policy change that was drafted and may be presented during today's meeting should have been made public and provided on DD2's board docs prior to this meeting. I do thank you for the agenda being provided, but if there's policy changes that are being looked at, I would like to know what those are. I feel that the policy committee should strongly consider reassessing policy changes if any proposed policy presented today does not include Mrs. Kelly Bates' public recommendation that any taxpayer within DD2 should have the ability to complete a concerns questionnaire form. It's not just parents and guardians that are concerned about the youth and the next generation. Every taxpayer should be involved with that process, if they choose to be. I would like to recommend that the policy change includes a requirement for school improvement councils to meet within 30 calendar days of a concerns questionnaire form being presented. I would like to recommend a change to how the Citizens Review Board is organized. Currently, only librarians and department heads are allowed to recommend candidates to be vetted to join the council. This policy should be adjusted to allow sitting parents and citizens on school improvement councils to be a part of the process. Additionally, there is not enough transparency regarding if the Citizens Review Board is operational or exists. This past week, a new Citizens Review Board was formed because the superintendent, board, and DD2 employees were not aware that it somehow dissolved. The current policy states that a school board member will be part of the selection process for the Citizens Review Board. However, none of the other school board members are allowed to know who comprises the review board. I think that's a conflict. I don't understand that. I don't know why there has to be secrecy in that area. The IJL policy should also be changed to apply decisions about book removal to internet and other online resources. This is a loophole that should not exist and does not protect students for inappropriate materials. So if you'd like to go to the DD2 website and look up the IJL policy, you can reference everything I've mentioned here today. But if you're looking to adapt any type of policy review change and make a vote today, I would strongly suggest that the policy committee consider waiting and discussing these issues a little more before making any decisions. I think there's a lot of issues with the current policy, and some major changes need to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bendetti. Okay, and next we have Mrs. Kim Scott. Mrs. Scott.
More things, I'm not sure. Hi there. I'm mainly just going to read this so I stay where I'm focused. Hello, my name is Kim Scott. We have 6 kids. Our youngest graduated from Ashley Ridge High School in 2021. Our entire family lives in the Dorchester District 2 school area. We are now the happy grandparents of 3 little ones under the age of 2. I believe strongly that grandparents and other residents of a school district have complete rights to give input on both curriculum and library books used in our public schools. Young parents, of which I think a few of you are, live very, very busy lives. Not only are they working jobs to provide food and shelter for their children, but they are getting up every morning in the dark to get those kids ready for school. Personally, I thank God every morning when I hear the bus go by at 6:30 a.m. that I'm no longer in that stage of life. They get their kids to the bus, or they drive them to school, they go to work, they pick their kids up from school, they get them to sports practice and other extracurricular activities, they get them home again to make supper, do homework, and somewhere in there they insert quality family time. They do bedtime, and then they fall into bed themselves exhausted. It's a demanding life, but parents do all that willingly because they love their kids and they want to give them the best chance at having a good future. What they don't have is extra time to monitor what is going on in the larger culture. So enter people like me, a grandparent and a retired citizen. I have some extra time, but I also have an extreme love for my grandchildren. I too want what is best for them. And what I see happening in our schools, especially through books like Let's Talk About It by Erica Moen, is a complete attack on the innocence and moral values of our kids. The topics addressed in that book are beyond disgusting. Here are just a few of the other titles of books that this woman has written. Smut Peddler, No Straight Lines, The Letter Q, Queer Writers' Notes to Their Younger Selves, Best Erotic Comics, True Porn, Volumes 1 and 2. Now you tell me, does this author have a pure and uplifting message for our children? Are her writings aimed at making them the best citizens and Americans that they can be? Is she encouraging kindness and wisdom and critical thinking skills? The answer is no, and you are lying to yourself if you think otherwise. We have entrusted you and the DD2 school community, the board, teachers, administrators, and librarians to truly have our children's best at heart. Don't let us down. That's what I wrote. I just want you to take it to heart. We really trust you. We elected you guys. Don't put our kids and think it's funny because they're being exposed to this complete trash. It's really important that they don't get exposed to that. If we want them to be good citizens and raise good families, then we need to take that seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott. All right, moving on, we will start to look at our policies for review today, and I will call up Mrs. Graham at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize for my voice. Hopefully it holds out through this meeting. So we are going to get started today with policy BEDB, which is board agenda. And you all can see here there are just some very minor changes to this policy. It was last updated in 2019, so these recommendations come both at the recommendation of a board member as well as in line with the SCASBA model policy.
I'll make a motion to accept policy BEDB as presented by Ms. Graham.
Okay. We have a motion to accept the policy. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Any discussion? All right, minor changes. So hearing no discussion, we'll go ahead and call for a vote then. All in favor of accepting it? Policy BEDB. Okay, it's unanimous. So we will move this policy on for first reading in front of the entire board. Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have policy EF, which is food services. And this does have an accompanying administrative rule that we will look at afterwards. This does have some significant changes. This policy has not been updated in many years. And in looking at the child nutrition program guidelines, we realized that we were missing policies on some things that have to be covered under those guidelines. So this is the policy and the rule are to work together to bring us in guidance with that, or in accordance with that. I will say the changes in policy don't significantly affect our practice.
Make a motion to accept policy EF as presented.
Okay, we have a motion to accept policy EF and a second. Do we have any discussion?
I just have one question. I noticed that from the original policy, it said that the principal and food service director will work with parents to obtain an application, and we changed it for, low-income lunch. We changed it to say that we will not deny a child. Are they still going to work to get that application in?
Yes.
And why was that removed from the policy, that aspect?
I think that it was just changed to reflect the fact that the child will be fed regardless of whether an application is received or not. So it is still part of our process to seek that application so that the district does get reimbursement for that meal. But we want to make sure that it's clear that the student is going to be fed either way. And so we don't want it to look as if it is dependent on that application. But I don't see a reason for that sentence to not be in there. If the board feels strongly about it, it's certainly part of our process that every time we reach out to parents about an outstanding meal balance, that they are reminded of the free and reduced lunch application and that it's available on our website at any time for them to complete. But certainly I don't see a reason why it couldn't be included in the policy if the board feels strongly about that.
I mean, I would like to make a motion to accept it with that amendment added to it, that line added back in.
Okay, I don't see a reason not to have the line. I mean, I think it's certainly something that we're doing, so if we are doing it, we might as well include it in the policy.
Yeah, I'll
Any
second
other
the motion.
thoughts about that?
I'll second the motion to put that back in there. So that's just that line. The principal and the food service director will work closely.
I just want to make sure that if they can get an application done, there's help and assistance to do so, and that we're getting them like the services provided and not just providing free lunch, if they qualify
Absolutely.
and we can give them the assistance they need to fill out the proper paperwork.
Sure.
Thank you.
We are happy to include that back, and we do have quite an extensive process to try to get that application out to everybody and make sure that it's accessible to everyone. But it is good to have it in there, so we'll leave that in there.
Yeah,
I
I think no
appreciate
reason
that.
not to have it in there. Okay, great. So then we have a motion and a second to accept policy EF food services with the addition of that, re-addition, I guess, of the line as we discussed it. So all in favor of that?
I did just
Sure.
have a, sorry,
Sure.
I had a quick question. I noticed in the main section there, it talks about providing adequate meal. Because I think we typically provide both breakfast and lunch. I guess if you look at the wording of that, adequate meal, I guess you're talking about an adequate breakfast, an adequate lunch. Is there a better way to potentially say that?
To specify both breakfast and lunch?
What if
Adequate
we-
meals, could just make it plural.
Yeah. I think that we could. I mean, that's certainly the purpose of the program. I think that by saying meals, it could be unclear which meals those are and whether we're providing 3 meals a day for students or multiple meals a day. But I don't know that there's really I mean, we don't serve dinner as a district, so I don't
If
think
you
that
look
there would
in
be a
the
lot of-
third bullet point, it does say meals there. So just to be consistent too, it might be good to add, to make the first bullet point have meals be plural.
Okay, we can certainly make that change.
I mean, do you think that would cover it?
Yeah, I think that's fine. So just to make that official, I'll make a motion to accept latest addition. So we've got that line added back in, as well as changing meal to meals.
Okay.
I second.
Okay. All right. So we yet again have another motion and a second to accept policy EF with now the 2 current changes, the addition of the original line we discussed, and now the addition of S to the meal in the first bullet point. All right. Any further discussion at this time? Okay. All in favor? Okay, and it is unanimous, so policy EF will be moving on to the entire board for first reading.
Excellent. Next up, we have EF-R, which is a new proposed administrative rule to go with this policy. As I referenced before, this does include some information about charging meals and how that will be carried over, how that information will be provided to parents that is required by the child nutrition program. So we just wanted to make sure we were in compliance with that through the addition of this administrative rule.
Okay, do I have a motion for the EF rule?
Sorry, I'm just trying to read it. I didn't get this one because
And
it wasn't
I do
uploaded.
apologize.
But yeah.
This one was uploaded. We were waiting on some information from our food services
I
department.
just wanted to
so
read it before
I'm happy to take a moment and let you all digest, or if you feel the need to carry it over to the next policy meeting, because I know you didn't have as much time to review this one.
I don't see anything.
I'll make a motion to
Yeah.
accept EF-R.
And I second that.
Is really, just for discussion, is there anything in the rule that we are currently not doing as far as a process that we're aware of in the schools or in food
No,
service
all of this
operations?
is already things that we were doing,
Yeah.
but we did need to specifically codify it in a policy.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to accept EFR, which is the rule. Any further discussion at this time?
No.
Okay, all in favor? All right, again, unanimous, so we will move this rule on for first reading.
Thank you. Next up, we have GCLE, which is a new proposed policy regarding unencumbered time for our elementary and special education teachers during the day. This is based on the new state statute that takes effect this coming school year, although we are already primarily implementing this within our district, but we are required to pass the policy within 90 days of the State Board of Education passing theirs, which they have done. So we wanted to go ahead and get this on the agenda. And as I said, the district is already doing this in our elementary schools and will be fully implementing it before next year in compliance with the state law.
I make a motion to accept policy GCLE as presented.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to accept the policy as presented. Do we have any discussion at this time?
I will say, I think it's good that we got ahead of this one, because I know there's a lot of districts right now that are jumping through some hoops to make that unencumbered time happen. So we're well ahead of the game on that guy.
Agreed. All right, great. So all in favor? GCLE, unanimous, and we will move this one on for first reading.
Thank you. Next up, we have policy IJL, library materials selection and adoption. And you all may recall at the last policy meeting, the district was asked to go back and look at adding a timeline to this. We certainly agree, based on our going through this process, that there were some changes that needed to be made to the policy. So as you can see, primarily on page 2 and 3 of the policy, some changes were made regarding adding a timeline. We did have a district committee that convened consisting of several principals, some of the media specialists, which I do see here today, if they have anything they would like to add on this, grade level directors, et cetera, who weighed in on what they felt were reasonable timelines that they could implement in their schools. So this is here for your information, as well as just some clarity on the process and making sure that the review at each level remained consistent in terms of the timeline as well as what was required of the committee who was conducting that review.
Why did we choose 30 days for the school and citizens review committee versus 20 for the board?
We felt that, and we can certainly change the board to match that. The board actually already said 20 days,
Okay.
But in speaking to the schools, they felt that the timeline that it would take for them to receive the information, they have to collect the materials, which could include ordering the books for all of those people. So they have to notify their SIC, determine who is going to participate in that meeting, order those books, provide those people an opportunity to review all that material, including reading the book in its entirety, and then reconvene and draft their response. And so our administration felt that the 30 school days was a better amount of time for them to complete that. We can certainly change the board to match that, but we felt like by the time it got to the board level, the materials would already be, collated and only organizing 7 people as opposed to organizing 7 community members, or at the school level, a much larger number of people. It would be easier to organize the board and to have that review occur within that 20-day period.
I think my concern was more the 30, because that's, if you were to take this on a calendar, it's going to play out for like 3.5 months potentially, which I still feel is really long. I was thinking like 20 days, 20 days, 20 days. I don't know, any discussion on that? Anybody else have any opinions? I'm not opposed to leaving it the 30, 20 necessarily. I think that's reasonable, but ideally, like, I still think putting a parent through that process for that long is a really, I mean, that's a long time.
We did discuss that at length in the committee meeting, and certainly that's the will of the board in terms of that timeline. But there were concerns that even 15 days, 30 calendar days was not long enough to get all of that information, compile the team, especially at the school level where it includes the SIC.
It's 30 working days, right?
30 business days, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, we had talked about 30 calendar days initially, but there was concern that that just was not enough time to organize that group of people, find out which ones of them would be participating, order the books, have them have an opportunity to review the books and the other material, and then come back and talk about it with everybody's schedules. So certainly, though, if the board feels that it needs to be a shorter timeline, we are happy to accommodate that. That was the recommendation of the administration, who would have to implement that at least at the school level.
Well, while I don't love the idea of the process being dragged out, I also, you got to think a lot of these people on the SIC are volunteers.
Right.
And so you're asking them to find their personal time to read a book that may or may not be short. We don't know how, I mean, it could vary. So I'm tempted to err on the side of the little bit longer time, even though I agree with you. It certainly,
That's certainly better than
it's
6 months. So.
It's not a short process.
And also, in order to make sure that those that are vetting the books do a thorough job, you would want them to have as much time as they can have. And I do understand having a book that is objectionable on the shelf, continue to be there in your child, but that's a conversation I think you will need to have with your children. But in order to make sure that that time is adequate, I'd suggest that we, let it remain as it is for now.
Could we add something about pulling the book while it's under review? Or would you?
I would leave that at the discretion of the board. Typically, unless the decision has been made that it should be pulled, it is not. However, I will say that practically, a lot of the times it is checked out at that point to an administrator or a teacher who might be reading it out of
Reviewing it.
interest. But that doesn't mean that that is necessarily the
Okay,
case.
I will ask that we put that checkbox when we get to the form that was removed to the person who's complaining. There was a box that says, please don't allow my child to check out this book, like the person that issued the complaint. That was removed from the amended form. So I will, when we get there, at the very least, want that put back in.
And we're happy to explain that as well, just for your information. We felt like it was not necessary for a parent to fill out that form and provide all of that information when if all that they are asking for is for their student not to have access to the book, because that is already available to any parent at any time to just email their media specialist or their school administrator and say, I don't want my child to have access to this book. And so that way they wouldn't have to fill out this form and submit it. If they're not asking that the book be reviewed for removal from the library, they just don't want their student to have access to it. So that's why we changed that process.
I think if they're submitting the form, they not only don't want their student to have access, they don't want any student to have access. So it goes without saying, if they're submitting the form, they clearly don't want their child to read it. So, you know what I mean? If they just wanted their child not to read it and that was their only concern, I don't think they'd be filling out the form to begin with.
Right, which is why we said they no longer had to fill out the form. They could just email their media specialist.
They had to
So-
fill out the form currently to not have their child?
No.
It was not required, but people were doing that
She's
because
saying,
it had that check.
I think what Ms. Graham is saying is that there was a concern, I guess it sounds like, that people would feel like that was the way to request that their child not have access to a book, when in fact, that's not the best way if that's all you want to do. At that point, you should just email. And so I guess people weren't, they were confused, it sounds like to me.
I think people felt like somebody might be confused that they had to fill out that whole form and then just check that one box when all they really had to do was
just call.
email the title and their student's name to the media specialist. And I'm happy to let our media specialist address that if they would like, in terms of the way they handle that. But I think that occurs on a very regular basis, and they don't have a problem doing that without the form, without debating whether the SIC and the school team needs to be convened, because it's just affecting that one student, and that's that parent's decision. So
I do think, and on that same note, I think you could probably formalize, because I understand right now they probably just email or however that works. I think you could formalize in policy or through a policy form, and then that could be disseminated out to parents to say, if somebody just if I do not want my child reading this book, I fill out this form. It's linked on the website. It's very easy, and then that gets submitted to kind of formalize that request.
sure, we could create a separate form for that.
I think that's a good idea. That way, it's not just an arbitrary email. It's more a specific process and a form that people go through.
All right.
Kind of clarifies all of that.
Okay.
Do you think
Sorry,
it would
we
be helpful
sidetracked
also?
with the I'm sorry, Ms. Powell.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say we got a little sidetracked with the exhibit there, so I don't know if we wanted to go back to the policy, but we can do both at the same time. either way.
As far as the form, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause
no,
we
we
were
can
gonna
go back.
talk
I
about-
definitely have more I want to say about the policy. Unfortunately, sorry, I'm not
That's
trying
okay.
to
Go ahead.
keep us here all day, but
In line with what Justin said, do you believe we could also have something posted in the library so that, even it may not be a parent, it may be a visitor in the library and they see a certain book there?
I think what I was specifically talking about was for a parent, because you wouldn't necessarily have if a visitor had a concern with a book, they would fill out the form we have on file currently to share that concern.
actually they wouldn't because you have to have a child in the school. So if they're just
We'll talk about that in a minute. But there's a form for that. What I'm talking about is specifically for a parent that has a concern.
Okay.
And they don't want access, because we have that today. A librarian will limit access to certain books.
Right.
If a parent says, hey, I don't want my child reading this book, all I'm saying is to have a form, very easy form saying, I do not want my child to have access to this book.
I wish there was a way we could just utilize that in PowerSchool even, where a parent could just log into PowerSchool if that's something we could look into versus just having a printout form that you email, like a note in PowerSchool that goes to the media specialist. I don't know. I'm
But
not
I think
sure
it
or
would go.
something
I
like
think
that.
it would go into PowerSchool because the librarian and the teachers are going to use the information in PowerSchool. But I do think, from a form perspective, you need to have it formalized. They have to sign. They have to put their name on it. They have to sign it, so that so it's a formal document, and then that would then go in PowerSchool.
And I will defer to the media specialist. I don't believe it's connected to PowerSchool because they have their own system that they use in the library to check out materials. That is what they input that information into, which will flag it if that student goes to check out that material. Yep. So we could certainly ask PowerSchool. We don't.
I just
always
wasn't sure
have
if there was a
control
way to
over what
streamline
happens
it,
in PowerSchool, but-
like where a parent could just go online and log into PowerSchool or through Schoology or somehow where it's just, simple.
Yeah, we would have to
Technology.
communicate with the state. We only have so much control over what we can put in PowerSchool in terms of categories and whatnot. But we can certainly develop a form that can be easily submitted straight to the media specialist or to the administrator, and then we will certainly talk to PowerSchool about a way to make that join up. But I believe that the media specialists actually take that information and input it into their own material system.
Yeah. So thank you.
didn't know
It
if you
helps
wanted-
to know logistically how you do it,
Yeah.
I'm good with the form.
Okay, so we will
I like the
develop-
idea of the form too.
We
And
will
then-
develop a form. Does the board want that to be put into board policy with these other exhibits or just made available online?
I don't think it's a bad idea to have it in
I
policy.
think it'd be like Form IJL3.
Okay, sure, we can certainly do that.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
So are we moving on?
Okay.
So where were we on here? Well, obviously, I still share my thoughts about including all taxpayers or community members, concerned citizens being able to share or submit a form. I know that other people did not feel that way, so I'm not going to die on that hill, but I still, just on the record, think that that's how it should be, and I don't know if there's any discussion or anybody else wants to add their 2 cents into that in light of some of the conversation we heard, public comment we heard.
Yeah, I could go, the honest answer, I could go either way, and I'm really okay for anybody in the community. I would say within the Dorchester District 2 taxpayer community. I do think if you're going to put something like that in the policy on the form side of things, I do think on that form, it needs to be notated the relation then of the complainant, I guess would be the word. What their relationship is to our school system. So that would be my only comment. But again, I'm okay if we want to put in policy for any, I don't know the wording you've got, but any.
I just said, I think initially what I had proposed was taxpayer within Dorchester District 2 school lines or school district lines or, community member. I don't remember what I worded in the initial.
I think we might have just
What
talked
I
about
sent
it.
you?
but
Okay.
certainly we can put in that language if that's the will of the board. I know the committee did discuss that and felt that limiting it to parents was appropriate because parents do have that invested. They are invested in our schools, and we wanted to ensure that we didn't have interference from outside our community, from other states or things like that. But certainly if we limit it to Dorchester 2 residents, we can include that language if that's the will of the board. So.
Yeah, I just think, again, like I mentioned the last meeting as well as what we've heard today, it's not always that simple. There's different community, like you rally around your kids and have other members of your family come and support you and help in defending your kids and parenting them and, in your family. So I think to limit it just to a parent is sort of discriminatory to other people who might have those child's interests in mind, and just the children in our community. So that I would like to have that added. That's me. So I would like to make a motion to add that to the policy.
Can we go through, so you, if you don't mind, can you just state your motion and maybe we'll do you have more changes?
I do. I'm sorry.
Can we go through all of those?
Okay, yes, that's fine. So diving into this process and just going through this process and the last 6 months was that me? I kind of was reviewing how we select the Citizens Review Committee. Okay, so the process right now as it stands is members from all schools recommend, principals, librarians, and administrators from all schools send their recommendations to the selection committee of who they think should serve for the Citizens Review Committee. I think right there is already an issue because you're having principals, librarians, teachers choose who they want to be even considered versus somebody being able to, if let's say Joseph Pye Elementary they were going to submit their people, sending out an email and saying who's interested in being part of this district committee, them all having an equal opportunity to participate, and then randomly selecting people that would go and be considered for the selection committee to serve on the Citizens Review Committee. Does that make sense? Because I feel like if you have teachers, librarians, hand-picking the people that they want to even be considered, you already have that, and then it goes to the selection committee, and while their names are anonymized in the selection committee process, you have a form that literally asks, define in your own words how you or give examples of obscenity, profanity, stereotyping, sexually explicit material, hate literature. So you already know how these people feel about those issues. On top of it, the previous form, not the one that we amended, the one that we just selected our Citizens Review Committee with, it even asked blatantly, do you ever believe censorship is appropriate? And I think, if a person answers yes or no, and I'm a selection committee and I'm like, hey, this person absolutely will never censor a book. Picking that person, this person thinks censorship's okay. Not picking that person. So I think to say that the committee is non-biased and a representation of our community, it's kind of flawed because the whole process is hand-selected, if that makes sense. Teachers and principals and librarians are selecting the people that are being recommended to the selection committee. The selection committee are reading all this information about how these people feel about obscenity, removing books, and then they're picking who they think will serve based on those responses, and then you have 7 people that have been filtered through all those things. So I just don't love the process. I wish it was randomized. I hate to I know this policy has been before us several times, and I hate to drag it out, but I feel like we're going to continue to run into these issues with the book reviews and people wanting to bring books to us. And if people aren't confident in the process, that it's not biased or that they can't trust the process, I think it's kind of everything we're doing is in vain, really, tweaking the other parts of the policy. But again, open to discussion. I just would like to see rewording the way we choose the people that go to the selection committee to be random, and I'd like the selection committee to not have to look at all this information when deciding who is going to serve on the Citizens Review Committee, because I think, yeah.
I know Ms. Powell has to leave to go to another appointment, but before, she actually was the board member who served on the selection committee. So do you have anything you want to add before you have to leave? Not to put you on the spot, but because I do think it's important, we all definitely want this process to be clean and fair and to feel like that committee that's making the decision has been chosen, you know, in a way that's not biased. So do you have any input? Because you're the only one of us who's really been in that position.
Well, when you're talking about being biased, I think we're all biased in anytime we have to make certain decisions. But bias in the sense that we automatically say this person would never do this or this person would never agree or would always agree. I don't believe that's the way that we basically assess those applicants that were submitted to us. We looked at the overall of what they were trying to say and made a determination from there. Now, none of us will be perfect in trying to make those determinations, but we do the best that we can.
No,
the
I
other
understand
thing is we also wanted to make sure that we had the male's point of view. We wanted to make sure we had X number of females. We could not tell whether or not they were white or non-white. So we just basically used certain criteria, such as did they have children? And if they said a lot of times they would tell us how many children they had, I believe.
Yeah, age, sex, race, and age of children.
So we tried
optional.
to look across the spectrum at what was presented to us in order to come up with that committee. And it's not a process that we stayed within the confines of the time that they'd given us. We went over because it was not an easy process. We wanted to make sure that we were fair. And to a certain extent, I think the librarians should have a say because they're the ones that went to school for that particular area. So there are certain books that they know need to be in the library. Now, there are certain things that may be in a library that I personally would not endorse, and nor would I want my children to necessarily read. Well, I have the right to basically have that conversation with my children. And when I was in the classroom, if a parent objected to anything that I had signed as a reading assignment, they always had the right to ask for a different assignment, not necessarily that book. But a lot of times, I will say this, we're humans, and we're going to make the best decision most of the time that we can, with the children in mind.
I don't doubt that. That's not my concern. My concern is when choosing the Citizens Review Committee, are we asking people their personal views on obscenity, profanity, stereotyping, removing books ahead of time? Like, I don't really want to know what their personal preferences are or what their views are, because I feel like in order for it to be clearly like a representation of our community and anonymous, I shouldn't be able to go, oh, this person's a male. Like, they don't have to say their age, sex, race, or if they have children. They don't have to say the school level represented. They don't have to say their education level. Those are all optional. The things that are not optional is saying how you feel on obscenity, profanity, stereotyping, sexually explicit material, hate literature, biased literature based on religious, gender, racial, or political things. And then the other thing was, I don't have the former form in front of me. I have the updated form that we're proposing today. But the former form specifically asked, do you ever think it's acceptable to censor books or something like that? And I'm like, that's a yes or no question. You have the form? What? I mean, I don't know if she can give it to me. I just don't know what it says. I guess I could pull it up.
I can tell
on
you
here,
what it says.
I just think, like, for me, I feel like if I'm picking people who are going to review a book and give me a non-biased opinion, and I'm non-biased in picking these people, I don't want to know where they stand on these issues. Like, I want anybody. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what I'm saying is it wasn't just one question that we base our choosing on. In fact, we each were allowed to choose those applicants that we thought would be appropriate. Mm-hmm. And then we came back and started going through those number 7, number 9, whatever the number may have been. And then we came to a consensus based on a compilation of factors that were given to us.
So
But-
what did you do to make sure that you have a cross-section representing our community outside of gender? Because if they're not required to give their gender, race, the only thing they're required to give is their opinions on these issues, how do you know you have a cross-section representation from the community? Did you pick somebody who absolutely will never ban books and somebody who wants to ban all the books? Is that how you got a cross-section? Because the policy states that the selection committee will select a cross-representation from our community based on the forms, but if they're not required to provide any of like the information about age, sex, gender, the only thing they're required to provide is their personal opinions on censorship, obscenity, profanity, are you picking people with a broad range of opinions? And
Well,
how are constituents supposed to feel confident that a broad range of opinions are being selected if that's the case?
If I may, and I apologize, I think we're getting it's a little bit cart before the horse, because the one I'm looking at in our folder here has some of the updates you're talking about, like race and that sort of stuff. So I think the updated form has that. I think we're talking about what has happened in the past couple of weeks.
Let me see, because I have the updated form.
Well, the updated form,
In front of
it's several of the items are optional, but I think that Ms. Bates her concerns are more about the question, like question number 2, and then number 3 has been removed.
I think it should have been.
Yes, I agree. So really, the biggest question, I guess, is number 2, because all the other stuff is optional.
And again, I apologize, because I think we're getting ahead. The form is a separate.
So I guess the
Yeah.
issue is the policy refers to the form in the process in which the committee selected.
So are you saying we don't need the form at all?
I want it to be randomized.
No
think
form.
I just, or like very limited information. I don't feel like we need to be asking people their religious affiliate or like how they feel about obscenity, profanity, and these issues prior to. I don't
do
know.
have to go, but let me say, we also had some objection to the form and thought it needed to be revamped, but we were given those forms, and that's what we worked on. So if we want to upgrade or make some recommendations for changes, I think we should, for the actual applicant's form.
Yeah, my concern is just because we didn't have a standing citizens review committee as is, and we just went through this process, and we're reviewing this policy, it's better to kind of hammer out the details now so people can have full confidence in the process and ensure that we select the committee that's going to serve for 3 years per our new recommendation. People have trust in the process and that we feel like it's a true representation of the community and not people that are just selected based on their views, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so the only, maybe the counterpoint to that, I think about, for instance, jury selection. It's actually a very similar process. And so if you think about the jury selection process, and Ms. Graham, you're an attorney, so you can probably tell me better how that exactly works, but I believe jurors are brought up to the stand. They are asked very personal questions. They're asked about their personal biases, dealing with the potential case on the floor. And at that point, the attorneys and the judge figure out whether this would be a good, for lack of better words, a good committee member, a juror for that trial. Is that
Correct.
close?
Yes.
And so again, with this process, I don't think it's much unlike that.
But you
and I
have like
understand
the
what you're
two
saying.
sides of the spectrum arguing, and you can say, I won't accept that jury member, and the other side can say they won't. But if, you know what I mean? Like there's the opportunity.
But that's why I think we have an actual selection review committee, so that they can all then come together and they have all these applications. Again, and if there is something wrong with that process, if over and over and over as a board we continually find it seems like these members seem to be very slanted one way, they're not randomized, whatever the case may be, then I would say that's an issue, the selection review committee. But as far as the actual information, I think for a selection review committee to pull volunteers, to pull a review committee for said book, I think you do have to understand more about where that person's coming from to get a broad spectrum.
Well,
If
that's
not,
not-
you could very well randomize, that entire
And it might
pool.
not be a broad spectrum, is that what you're
At
saying? Yeah,
1000%.
I mean, I understand that too. So that's why I'm bringing the dialogue and suggestion, because I just want people to be able to feel confident in the process. And I think a lot of people might feel if the people on the selection committee review this, they might all pick people that would vote a certain way. And so if you know that information, I don't know. It's
But I think the job of the selection committee is to try to use that information to pick
Have
a
a crossover,
variety
yeah.
of people.
So-
And so, yes, you're trusting that selection committee, which, it's not a small committee. I mean, you've got 2 media specialists, 2 teachers, an administrator, a member of the school counseling department, and a board member. So the idea is that they come together, they use the information in those forms to try to pick people who do not all think the same, who represent our community. And I guess
I think the only way you would know if they all think the same
is
Is
with
to
questions
ask
such
those
as
questions?
this, correct? And
I mean, that's a
it's
fair
gonna
enough
be-
argument.
Again, I think I thought about this. You go to a jury selection, and it is for a capital punishment case. They're going to ask you, do you believe in the death penalty? Do you think so and so should be executed? They're going to ask you that on the juror stand, and so it's no different than here. I would even say, the question came up.
I'd be
earlier.
interested if somebody answered on the previous form, it says, do you ever think censorship is justified? If yes, under the circumstances, would you consider censorship an acceptable solution? And the way that it says censorship, I think do you think they really picked somebody that said yes and somebody that said no? I don't know. I'm just curious.
I will say there
Well,
are
that's-
people in the audience who I don't want to call out individually who did also serve on the selection committee.
Okay.
If the board is interested in hearing from them, I don't want to call them out, but
Yeah.
if the board wants to hear from them, I'm sure they're welcome to come up. I will also say that in my discussions with the district committee, that is actually why that question was removed, because they felt like there was really no good answer to
Right.
that question, and censorship has a connotation, and
Yeah.
and there's a difference between censorship versus school libraries, and so that was why that question was removed. But
Well,
if the
I
board
guess
is
my
interested,
concern
I
is that the committee was just picked based on the previous policy. Now we're changing the policy, so I feel like if we're going to change the questions that are asked, you'd have to reselect the committee, in my opinion. But that's a different issue. Okay,
So-
and yeah, go
So again, going back to the actual policy, just to make sure we're, I think, staying in
Yeah.
line here. So are we requesting that IJL Form E2 is no longer used at all?
I just wanted to see if anybody offered a different perspective, or even the way that the names come to the selection committee is the other concern I have.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yes. So is there a way that we can put something in the policy that makes a statement requiring the selection committee to have a cross-representation or something like?
It does require cross-representation. I guess my concern
Does.
is,
I'm looking at it. Oh, I see.
the
Wait.
school principals and libraries pick who they think would want to serve.
Wait, it does say that in there?
For
It's
the,
the
The fourth
bullet point. Second
Oh, yes, it
sentence.
does. Okay, yeah. Cross-section of our community.
yeah, it does say cross-section. So, that was the part that made me feel better about it.
Right,
you
yes.
know.
So it already states it. Yeah.
But it says libraries and department heads of their representatives or their representatives from all schools in the district will submit names of people in the community who they feel would consider doing the service for the school. And this is, they're recommending who they want to serve on the Citizens Review Committee or be considered to serve on the Citizens Review Committee. Sorry, there's so many committees. So I just why is that not available? As a parent, let's say my kids went to Pi and I wanted to serve on this committee, I would have liked an email saying, hey, would you be interested in it? I wholeheartedly would have submitted my name, and then so I could have been considered. Why are we not allowing volunteers in the community who want to be considered the option to be considered? I just think when you're limiting it to allowing libraries and department heads and the representatives of their schools to select the names to even be considered at the beginning of the process, you're already negating a bunch of people who might want to participate in the process. And
So maybe the fix there, because again, at this level, you're talking about the Citizens Review Committee, so this is at the district level, correct? So I think the fix is at the beginning of the school year, you create some sort of process. If there are
Yes.
if you are a volunteer, if you're a parent, whatever, however we get that information out, if you are willing to be a part of that citizens review committee,
You can
that
volunteer.
information gets submitted to the
when you-
district,
yes.
and that goes into
The selection committee.
the pool.
Yes.
Right, so then you, at the district level, so it's not necessarily coming from
Schools.
the schools. It
That
could be
way,
an
parents and
open-
community members, I know, like, I had just as much chance to be on the committee as somebody there or somebody there. And so then, once it gets to the district selection committee and that's all anonymized, I would feel good with that process. Maybe it's at registration when you sign up for school improvement council and PTA and all
I
that.
think the challenge is going to be getting a cross-section of people to actually put their name in the hopper to be part of that process.
Well, I think you have people on all sides and all areas of the debate that are interested in participating in this sort of thing.
You would hope. And we don't know until we put that process into place, again, to create
So
that.
what are you saying for the process? So the district
So
would just
it would
solicit
say-
volunteers?
School, instead of libraries and department heads or their representatives from all schools in the district will submit names, it would say names will be gathered at, volunteer names will be gathered at registration to be considered, blah, 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 something like that.
But we do online registration, so
Or whenever
I just
you
think
would
we
do
need to
it.
be specific about it.
I just don't know how logistically you want, what avenue you want. Like, do you want to send out an email? Do you want to do a text blast? Do you want to do it at registration? I don't really care how we collect that names, but parents knowing that they had the opportunity to participate if they wanted to, I think could maybe make people feel better about the process.
And the other thing is that it won't be, you're talking about the beginning of the school year. I mean, if these people are serving for 3 years, is it something that we're thinking we would just keep a list of names? That way, if we ever had to replace someone, is that kind of what?
I mean, like every year, like refresh the names. You know what I mean? Because then if our
You mean
committee,
in the pool?
yeah, so like, people can update if they would like to continue to still be considered or not, because then when we run into an issue where our committee dissolved, we have a pool of people and we are not reliant on our department heads or principals to try to last minute, like, oh, do you want to serve on this committee? Do you want to? And recommend these people. We have a pool of volunteers in the community that are invested and want to participate.
So if I could have leave of the board, I could probably develop some language to that effect, and I can provide it to the policy committee. If you all would like to move this forward with that change to first reading, I can provide that to you all for any feedback beforehand, and you can let me know if we are able to move that forward, or if you want to, I can develop that language and the policy committee can review it at the April meeting.
I would like to make a motion to move it with that change, as well as the change that all taxpayers within Dorchester District 2 can issue a complaint.
Sorry, so I understand the taxpayer change.
And
The
then
language that we're looking for on the second part.
she's gonna figure it out, but
I'm happy to try to draft something, and I can share it with you all for whether or not it meets the criteria that you all feel it should. I would think something about names will be gathered from volunteers at each school and provided to the selection committee, but I can kind of tweak that
volunteers
exact
can submit
language.
their names to be considered. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Not volunteers will select volunteers. Volunteers can submit their names to be
Yes.
considered, because I think it's important. The
Volunteers
verbiage.
submit
is-
their names to be considered for this position. And then schools can do that in whatever way they typically solicit their volunteers, either through newsletters, through emails, through facts and fees, however it is that they typically do that.
So those are my two concerns. That
I will second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to move policy IJL to the entire board for first reading with the two changes. One being that all Dorchester District or Dorchester County taxpayers, no, Dorchester District
School District 2
2
taxpayers.
taxpayers, yes, okay, would be allowed to submit a concern or complaint. And then the other change is in regards to the District Citizens Review Committee, and that is opening up that opportunity to serve at the district level to volunteers, correct? Yes? So, okay. All in favor? All right. So we will send that on for first reading to the entire board. All right.
All right, I know we talked a little bit about this. I just want to make sure if we are ready to move forward. I guess let's go in order with IJLE1, which is the materials, concerns, and questionnaire. I do already have noted on here that we will create a separate form, and we may just leave the asterisk and link where the separate form is, so if somebody finds their way to this form and wants to do the individual form, that will be easy for them to find.
I mean, there's going to have to be some updates. If you're opening this up to anyone outside of a parent or legal guardian, obviously you're going to have to make like student's name, student's school, student's grade level. That's going to be optional information.
And then maybe they could include, like, if they're representing an organization or maybe representing a student or something. I don't know how they would.
Yes, and the committee did consider that because it did previously say whether they were on, filing this on their own or on behalf of an organization. I think that the concern was that individuals who submit this should have read the material in its entirety before they submit this. And so to say that they're representing an organization is difficult to do. So they should really be filing it on their own behalf.
So maybe we should specify that it has to be an individual, not an organization?
Well, we took off the option to file as an organization, but, we didn't write anywhere, I guess, specifically that an organization would have to identify a representative who is moving forward as an individual.
So what do you propose that they need to add if it's?
Well, I think you could just make the student's name and school and grade level optional.
Asterisk it and just say it's optional?
Just say that's optional, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the assumption there, because again, I do think on this form, at this stage in the game, you need to know what the relationship is for that person putting in this concern questionnaire. And so my assumption would be if they don't fill out student's name, school, grade level, that they don't have a student in our schools.
My suggestion would be that we could add a line above that that says parent, legal guardian with a checkbox or community member, and then if parent, legal guardian, then and include the student information.
Yeah, that's good.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. I make a motion to accept IJLE1 form with that amendment.
I'll second.
Motion and a second to accept IJLE form with those changes, as we just noted. All in favor? Okay. Great. So it's unanimous. We will move that on with the policy.
Thank you. Next up, we have IJLE2, which I know we did already talk a bit about, but certainly want to open that back up for full discussion on that. This is the form that would be completed by a volunteer who wanted to be considered for the District Citizen Review Committee.
I mean, especially now, I think if we're opening it up, I think it does.
I'm fine.
This information would be necessary for the committee to decide if we have a cross-section.
I'm fine with that.
Which is required in the policy, as we stated. So it's important to have some of this information.
I make a motion to accept IJLE2 form as presented.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor? Okay, so again, unanimous. We will move that on for first reading as well.
Thank you. Next up, we have IKE, which is promotion, retention, and acceleration of students. I do just want to note here before we get too far into this one that we are recommending deletion of policy IKEA, which is about acceleration of students. Because that information has been incorporated into this policy, we felt like those topics all fit together better as one policy. But the information has been carried over almost exactly from IKEA into IKE. And there are some significant changes here. to bring our policy up to line with our practice and what we are doing. I would not say it's a change in our practice, but it is a lot of changes when you look at the form itself, the policy itself.
And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the majority of this is from statute.
Yes, that's correct.
Matter of fact, I don't know that any of it is not based on
The
statute.
district does have our own, for example, by statute, promotion from grade 10 to 11 would only be 11 credits, but we require 12 because of our own criteria in that. But otherwise, it does follow statute.
I had a question. I was curious if we already do this. It says, should a parent or legal guardian require that a student be retained without the recommendation of the principal, that parent or legal guardian is required to pay the full amount of the state and local costs to the district for the additional year of education? Is that something we already do if a parent decides to hold back their kid?
Yes.
Okay, I just was curious.
Yeah, that is already in place. Actually, I believe it was already written here in the policy, but is struck out. It was actually the very last line of this policy.
Okay.
But it was moved up to the retention section to make it more organized, I think.
Yeah.
Make a motion to accept policy IKE.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second to accept policy IKE. Any further discussion at this time? Okay. All in favor? Unanimous? So
Make a
we will-
motion to accept the deletion of IKEA, acceleration of students.
Second.
All right. Motion and a second to accept the deletion of policy IKEA. All in favor? All right. We'll send those recommendations to the board for first reading.
Thank you. And next up, I apologize. We have policy JFAB. This is something that did come before the policy committee last time with some proposed changes from the model policy. And so we have actually gone back and made it align better with the model policy, being that the board would be the ones to ultimately approve admission for non-residents as well as students who are transferring schools within our district. So we would develop a process. We already have processes in place for that, but where we would bring that before the board at different intervals throughout the year so that the board could approve those students for admission.
Just for discussion, I'll make a motion to accept policy JFAB, non-resident students.
I'll second that.
Do we know, have we talked about the actual process for bringing those forward to the board? Is that something we'll just see in our packets from now on?
So we would list it as a student matter that would, if there's no discussion about it, just as personnel, if there's no discussion about it, you would see that information in your packet, and then you could move to accept them. If there were to be discussion because of a question about something on there, then we would go into an executive session since it would be about a particular student.
And we would have, again, my assumption is we would have the actual reasoning for that student.
We can certainly do that however the board wishes in terms of what information is provided. I think a lot of districts just provide the name of the student, but we can certainly provide their transferring district or their reason for the request.
Yeah, I would certainly want to see, the name actually doesn't matter, but I would want to see the school that they're looking to be transferred into, as well as the reason that we're looking to allow them into the school.
I agree.
And then I'm assuming, moving forward as well, that transferring would not be allowed until the board voted on it, took actual action
Correct.
at a board meeting.
So right now, there are specific timelines for when students can enter our district or can transfer among schools. I do just want to note, this does not apply to special education students who are placed in a program outside of their home school because they're placed by the IEP team. Right. But for those students who are voluntarily asking to move to another school within our district, for those who are in district and looking to move to another school, they have a very specific timeline in May and June that they can apply for that transfer. And so we would just bring those to the board over the summer before they're told whether or not they would be allowed to enroll in their school that they're requesting. For those students outside the district, because it's anticipated that they may be moving in throughout the year, we would do that quarterly. And so only once per quarter that information would be brought to the board, and the families would be notified that there's a deadline to apply if you want to be approved to start by the next quarter, so that the board would have at least one board meeting in there and an opportunity to approve those.
Any further discussion? Okay, all right, all in favor of policy JFAB? Okay, unanimous, and we will move that one on to the full board for first reading.
And I'll make a motion to delete the rule JFAB
Yep.
as that is now in the actual policy.
Second.
All right, any further discussion on that? All right, all in favor? Okay, so we will delete that rule as well.
That's all the district has for recommendation today.
Thank you.
Okay. And we have no public comments, so you have to sign in to make a public comment, yes. Well, that is the general rule, yes. We prefer that you sign in to make a public comment.
I just do want to clarify that everybody has an opportunity to comment at the board meeting as well when it goes for first reading, if there are any pending questions at that time.
We do not take questions, but that is correct. So these policies are moving on for first reading to the entire board. So this is certainly not the end of this process. It's the beginning, and so there will still be time to come in front of the entire board and make comments on any. And of course, we are all always available outside of meetings to have conversations and listen to concerns or comments as well. Okay, so that being said, I will adjourn this meeting.